welcome to Human Stories. My name is Columba Gonzalez-Duarte. I'm a sociocultural anthropologist, and I'm currently an assistant professor at Mount Saint Vincent University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm giving you this talk from the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And today I'm going to be talking about butterflies and humans in Mexico, especially in an area known as the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve. So the monarch butterfly, also known as mariposa monarca or paloma in Mexico, we often say is an iconic insect because it travels across North America. This butterfly lives in what we know today as Canada and United States during the spring, summer, and early fall. And then it migrates all the way south to what we know today as Mexico, basically to spend the winter there in a warmer weather. So for the last 10 years, I've been following this butterfly across North America, pointing out to the forms in which this butterfly connects and disconnects habitats and people. And the main idea I want to convey with this research is that this butterfly allows me to see North America from that interconnected process. Although today I'm going to be talking about Mexico, I want to convey the idea that what happens in Mexico is always in connection with what's going on in the two northern countries, in the United States and Canada. So today we're talking about humans and monarch butterflies in Mexico. I picked this part of my research because there's an important developments going on at the moment, and also because it's an special important part for the conservation of this butterfly. As I have said, all the butterflies of the east coast of North America migrate to this single spot in the Mexican forest, only those trees, and they go back to those trees every year. And these butterflies do not even know the forest. They weren't there the previous year. These are new butterflies that will migrate to this forest every year, which makes the migratory and overwintering phenomenon spectacular for just viewing it, but it also makes its conservation easy in a way and not so easy in a way, as I will show you in this talk. It is easy in the sense that you have all the butterflies gathered in a single spot. So making a conservation program for that specific area, it was relatively easy at the moment it was planned. And why they have to conserve this butterfly? Well, because it is at risk, sadly. I want to insist here that what's going on in Mexico and the problems that the butterfly faces in Mexico are not unique in Mexico. This butterfly doesn't have a healthy habitat throughout all the migratory route. It doesn't have a healthy habitat in Canada or United States. So here you have a timeline of the human presence in this forest. We have human presence at least from the 1300s, that's 14th century, meaning that those indigenous groups known as Ñato or Mazahua or Ñaño or Otomis who share ancestry were living in this forest before colonial time. Then we have an important development with Spain's colonial occupation of this territory. People were at that moment displaced from their land. And then we have another period in which the colonial ruling ends in 1810. Then Mexico becomes an independent nation. And in 1910, there's a new important development for this forest because those indigenous groups that used to live in this area who were displaced from their ancestral territory with the Spanish occupation recover that land with the Civil War movement known as the Mexican Revolution, and which is also known as an agrarian revolution. They restitute the land, and that land is managed to the Ejido system, which is a system that is governed by the community. Individual households can have their own agricultural land in the lower hill, but the whole community will own the upper hill. That means that they could use the upper hill where the butterflies overwinter for hunting occasionally, harvesting wood for cooking, wood for commercial purpose occasionally, but also to perform rituals to show reciprocity with the forest. I really want to highlight that up to that point, we have a human presence in this forest, which is built in a reciprocal relationship with the mountain. In 1976, we have an important development for monarch conservation. That's the area when the scientist Frederick Earhart discovers the migratory route. He's able to track how the butterflies migrate from Canada throughout the United States and to Mexico. And that marks an important turn in monarch conservation because to that point, people in what we know today as Mexico will know the butterfly, will know about the migratory pattern, but this was a phenomenon that was unknown to the world of science and the world of conservation. So after Earhart tracks the route and the overwinter phenomenon is known to the world, we see an important development to protect this habitat. It starts in 1980, and it takes an important turn in the 2000s when the forest is designed as an UNESCO Man and the Biosphere program, as part of that program. And I do want to highlight that it's part of that program because that's a program that operates globally through the same model, which is some model I'm discussing next. So now that I gave you some context of the people and the history of this forest, you're going to be able to understand this map. And I noticed a lot of information there, but I'm going to highlight the most important parts of this map. You see two colors, and those are two different provinces, Michoacán and Estado de Mexico. The monarch forest is between these two states. So the reserve is also protecting, is creating between these two states. What you see there in darker green is the edge of the reserve. Outside that darker green, the forest is no longer protected. You also see there different colors of darker yellow and lighter yellow. And those are the land that is considered indigenous land and that was restituted after the Civil War movement to indigenous communities. The other purpose that you see there is it was restituted to mestizo communities. The differentiation between these two communities is not so strong. They share lots of patterns and relations with nature, and they also share a form of social reproduction. What you see in that lighter green with stripes shows the core area. And this is important because the UNESCO reserves that follow the Man and the Biosphere model have this same model of core and buffer area. Core area means no humans are allowed in this area. Only scientists are allowed to enter for conservation or scientific purposes, at least in theory. In the other area, human activity is allowed, although it should be sustainable. So that's the global model that the UNESCO follows. It was implemented in the reserve, and it was not so successful, in part because it didn't follow that pattern that I described before of using the upper forest commonly for hunting, rituals, harvesting medicinal plants or mushrooms. When you have the lower hills with the agricultural system, none of those things were allowed with this model, either the agricultural system in the lower hill or the common use of the forest in the upper hill. So that entailed important resistance from the communities to the institution in the reserve 20 years ago. And that takes me to my first finding, which is that nature reserves are problematic when these are planned through top-down conservation science. The Monarch Butterfly case shows us this. It's not a unique case of this reserve. We see more and more case studies showing the resistance to a model that is not fully created and designed according to the local practices and local relationships with nature, which tend to be relationships that do not see humans in separation of nature. They see humans as part of that nature and as part, and they at least imagine that they should be part of the policies to protect such nature. The other important finding, and here I want to highlight what I said at the beginning, is that Mexico is connected, and this reserve is connected with what happens in the United States and Canada, particularly after the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed, that created this sort of socioeconomic bloc. And those policies entail a higher demand of avocado. Avocado is more consumed now in the United States and Canada, and that entails more production in Mexico. And this reserve is in avocado land. Is an area that is good for avocado plantations. So what we see is that in that core area where, in theory, we shouldn't have humans only beyond any scientific work, we see an increased presence of organized crime. And it could be in the core area or on the buffer area. So my argument is that actually the institution of this reserve model has been detrimental for the forest because it has allowed a fertile ground for organized crimes to flourish in this area. I cannot explain here the reasons in which, in general, in Mexico, we see a rise of organized crime, but I'm gonna provide some links at the end that should provide you with this information. What is important here is to highlight that convergence of the presence of organized crime in this reserve and how they are logging the trees to turn out the monarch forest into avocado plantations. My other finding is related with traditional knowledge, local knowledge, or indigenous knowledge, and how this knowledge should be acknowledged in conservation policies, creating conservation programs that are designed in Europe or North America without fully integrating those knowledges and practices in the conservation policies tend to be detrimental for nature and humans. And my argument is that it is necessary to recognize those practices to redesign the policies occurring at this reserve. So this takes me to my final arguments. In this slide, you have three different images. One of them shows you a ritual conducted at the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve. People here are making a petition to the mountain for good water during the next year. Good water will mean a good harvest. So it's a reciprocal system in which people will go and pay their respects to the mountain, and the mountain, in exchange of showing that respect, should give good water for the rest of the year and for a good harvest. This knowledge is not acquainted by the UNESCO model. And the second image that you have there was created by Mexican activists who are calling attention to what they call red avocado. They say that we perhaps, when we consume this fruit, we see a green avocado, but actually it's red in the sense that it was produced through violence to the environment and violence to the people. And finally, that takes me to the other image that you have here, which is the form in which those indigenous communities who have inhabited in the reserve for centuries, who got the land restitution, who got the imposition of this reserve, are now fighting themselves organized crime in their lands, and they're trying to protect the forests from illegal plantation of avocado, and they're also trying to protect the forest for keep a healthy environment for the people and for the butterfly. So this takes me to my final remarks about how following this butterfly can show us those connections across people and these connections across habitats. And I want to insist that what we see occurring in Mexico is actually fully related with practices in the two northern countries. And that if we want to move to a sustainable protection of people, forests, and butterflies, we have to acknowledge the local practices and forms of related with nature, which see humans as part of the solution. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to watch more human stories.
Peace and light to you and yours. So I sometimes do this and do that.